Yeah, Lex had fucking John Carmack on a couple of months
Oh,
ago
okay.
too,
Okay.
and that was kind of interesting, obviously, because Carmack is Carmack. Um, I'm all wavy. I don't even know if that's coming up in the thing. Okay, we're good. I think maybe. What's up?
Cool.
Welcome back from Thanksgiving.
Yeah, it was a good break.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I wish it was a holiday. I
Yes, exactly. The
traveled
beauties of
with two laptops, and while people were watching football, I sat on the laptop and wrote in spreadsheets. And
this is the beauty of being a game dev in general.
yeah, stop, man, absolutely. But like, enjoyable time overall. But you know, what I mean, we're past all of that. What's this narrative debate then that's happening within your community?
Yeah. So a talk that we have been a lot of people around me have been talking about is about narrative, and it's really is pretty much exactly what you will assume it is that what are the merits of like linear narrative games, where you're just on track, you're not really making decisions that matter, um, and also the open world approach, which is the other end of the spectrum. And I think there's so many opinions on this. Basically, I don't know if there's any middle ground people. It is so hard to find anybody on the middle ground that are like, oh yeah, I kind of like one over the other. I feel like when it comes to game devs and even gamers, like they have very strong opinions about narrative. And I'll give one of mine right away. Mine is that I really just don't engage in narrative at all nowadays.
Oh, you're
I
fucking you Ludo motherfucker. Fuck you.
yeah, it's not now that you it's not even a spectrum. It's like a triangle. There's like this third party of people that are like that don't even do it. And here's the thing: I don't think I hate stories. I obviously watch movies. I don't hate narrative games, even technically, because I have played some that I really like. But I've been thinking a lot about this third category. I'll speak for a third category. Maybe you can give insight on the other
No,
ones.
please do. Go
Yeah,
into it. I want you to detail the problem, and let's try and make some statements, and we'll try and hit off
yeah.
some individual questions and see where we net out. Because it's definitely a big place. We could fucking rant and rave for a hot
Yeah,
minute on
yeah,
this.
yeah. I feel like the people in the triangle tend to not want to even listen to the other people. They're like, ah,
Of course
these
not.
Ludo people. But I remember the last talk we did. You were talking about Vampire Survivors,
Hmm.
and you were playing there. You can move your character, and then you're like, man, why can't I'm guessing. I'm guessing you're like, man, why can't I dash or roll or do something cooler than just Wazda a little bit and just sit there.
Yeah.
And I think that's very akin to how I feel about narrative games. So if I'm thrust in let's just say a very cool world, and I get to walk around a little, and then I'm hit with a cutscene, I feel like that is simply me being like, I don't want this right now. I want to keep exploring and doing what I want to do. So to me, it's kind of like an autonomy thing. Is like I want to be doing something else, but you're guiding me in a bad way. So just similar to Vampire Survivors, in my opinion. I
Okay.
think that's what's going on in my head.
Okay.
Yeah, and maybe let's see
See,
one
yeah.
last.
So
Yeah,
no,
go
yeah.
ahead.
So I like that, right? Because you mean just in linear narrative, right? Um, Linear narrative has. Well, let's try and define some games that are specifically that, right? Like, because I don't know, there's like a plenty of games that are just straight narrative, I guess, right? But the mechanics behind the game is what kind of keeps you intact, right? I would say like Saints Row the Third, great example of a linear narrative game. There's no decisions to make in the storyline. Every quest is exactly the same. If you play it, it's the same thing every time. There's no difference if you played this one, then played that one, then played this one. It's all the same. But the in between is the thing that really glues you to the thing. The story kind of goes away, but it's an accompaniment to the the actual craziness, right? It sets the scene and it tries to tell you, why do I have a dubstep cannon? Why am I fighting aliens in space as the president of the United States, right? So to me, I think some of those types of things, if we're talking around like those types of games and how they act, the story is there to accompany the madness, right? There's something else that's driving me along, and that's where the ludology comes in versus the narratology. I might be still interested in the small places where I can inject a little bit of something something. Like I remember at the very beginning of that game, it's like one of the first dialogue options you get the option to like slap somebody or tell them off or
There
something
you
like that,
go.
right?
There you go.
But it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? It has no impact on the game, and I dislike. It's not that I dislike, but like I will say that there are enough games out there with decision trees that burn you in the options, right? Where like the line of dialogue that it tells you, like, do you want to select this, right? Maybe this is like Mass Effect, I would say, right? Mass Effect tells you a line and it says it to you, but when you tap it, the character seems to say something completely different.
Yeah.
They say it in a tone that's like completely different. And you're like, wait, that's not what I that's not what I meant to say. That's not what I wanted as the option. So now all of a sudden we have this breakdown of like the Half-Life principle, right? I am Gordon Freeman. Gordon Freeman doesn't say anything. I say things for Gordon Freeman in that third person narrative. Nobody hears me though, right? But I'd still say it, so that sits me into that player role so much more. It tells me who I am. Whereas, oh, if I'm Commander Shepard and I'm picking lines of dialogue, but then the character is saying something else, well, all of a sudden then I'm like, am I that character? I'm not that character. I'm actually some other person that's now meta managing this character, and I feel that disconnect between the two, and I can that has real fundamental impacts on player positioning, why I'm playing this game, huh? Like, am I here? Like, you're thinking about dialogue that happened like fucking moments, like 30 minutes ago, and you're
Yep.
like, I got into this firefight because I selected this option that I didn't even think would lead to this outcome. It's like, this is bullshit, dude. Maybe reload the
Yeah.
save, right? Maybe go back. Maybe try like a couple of different options and see what happens.
Yeah. To me, I think you actually very much described sort of the pros and cons of the linear narrative and kind of the heart of the debate. I think in a linear game, if the game just happens to really align with everything you want to do, which isn't as hard as it sounds. I mean, like, let's just take a typical hero's journey. Usually people kind of want to do certain things in that trope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
But
definitely.
you're right. If your game is trying to do something that the player doesn't want to do, then they have no choice but to kind of feel disconnected in a way. And that's so. I'll cover the last end of the triangle, which is open world. So now you have open world games, which give you options, and you can almost always choose what you want to do. So it doesn't run into that issue. However, then you run into the fact that you generally have a more watered down game by definition, because the devs can't make every single choice like super polished because they have to cover a lot of things.
Yeah.
So how do you feel about open world games? The hot new thing, by the way, because Sonic Frontiers is out. Um,
Oh,
there's a
that game's so garbage. I'll at
oh
least watch
interesting.
the dunk. Is that the one that had the Dunku review?
It did have one.
Yeah, I'm not like obviously never gonna play another fucking Sonic game
Yeah, yeah.
for
Eh,
life unless it's literally retro Sonic. It's because they're
yeah.
just the best. Like I don't know how
Yeah.
that franchise has devolved so far away from like greatness to just fucking trash.
That game actually is pretty highly rated, so I'd love to hear some opinions on
I've
that.
watched a 7 minute donkey video and I will tell you that game looks fucking terrible. That's
Good enough. And one last note about open world in gaming news. So there's this a dress up game on mobile called Love Nikki,
Yeah, of
which is
course.
very very successful, by the
Massively
way.
RPG
Yeah. Yep.
style. Yeah, I could tell you a bunch of other Japanese games that are super similar, super similar off of the App Store in the same way.
Yep, yep. And they made a lot of money from that to make there's a upcoming game called Infinity Nikki, and
Oh,
it's a open world dress up game.
yeah, hell yeah.
Yeah, open world. So I can't wait to see this because I did play Love Nikki. But anyways, yeah, how do you feel about open world games?
So I think it all depends on like which ones we're talking about, right? What we were saying off camera was that like spending time in colleges and doing a little bit of teaching here and there and talking to students and stuff like that, right? The same trope that I always hear is that there's always one person in the room that's making an open world RPG game. Like, there's always one person who's doing that, and I'm like, no, you're not. You're not doing that. You're not doing that as one dev. You're not doing that meaningfully as one dev, and you're not doing it as it's not going to come to the way that you want it to be. So you're just not doing it. You'll never complete it. It's not going to happen. Sorry. Like, pick something different. Don't do it because you're wasting your own time, but you're also just kind of like, to me it's always like, all right, that's the person that's foolish, right? That's the person that doesn't really know what they're doing, but they're trying their best, right? Which is fine. Okay, good for them. But it's a hole that people fall into massively. There's a shit ton of work that go into open world RPGs. Um, Now, I think that there's linear narrative in a lot of these things too, right? Not all of them are big decision trees. I think this is like where we need to like kind of reframe the conversation around as well too. Is like it's the systems behind all of these things, right? RuneScape, old school RuneScape, open world RPG, linear narrative, right? It's just that the player gets to pick and choose what quests they want to do first. Which there's no dialogue trees, there's no decision base on the inside. You get a little bit of like left or right, but that usually closes off the quest, or there's one option that actually like is the right option for you to actually hit. But each quest by itself is linear narrative. So are we saying then that it's fine in an open world RPG that the quests are all linear? Or do they have to be more like, hey, here's Fallout 3, Fallout 2, New Vegas, right? Where it's like sometimes or even going back, System Shock. I have a skill tree. I have things that my character is good at, hacking, social engineering, um, you know, clairvoyance, blah blah blah. Maybe they've seen some past knowledge from a previous quest that they did first, and that's given an extra dialogue option that then gives unlocks a new way for that to work on this quest, right? Like those are interesting levels of depth, but sometimes you just stumble upon those things. You don't necessarily intentionality like have intentionality to like be in that position as a player. Sometimes you're just like, oh, I got that staff from like this dude 3 regions ago that I did a side quest for, and that now all of a sudden means something over here, right? Um, so I think that it can be there's levels and depths to all of these things that make and break what you kind of want to do. And I would say the culmination of a lot of this is the Outer Worlds, to me, where the Outer Worlds gives you, especially in the story mode, you have your skill tree, you have your things that you're good at, but you pick and choose what dialogue options you're going to use at specific points to get into the quests. And that usually then actually goes and sets up the puzzle of the quest itself.
Yeah.
So it's like, depending on what I've said and depending on what my skill tree and my reputation and things like that, things will either be harder or easier. A door might be locked or unlocked. There might be a key over here. I might have to go and fight my way through, or I might be able to just walk through. And that by itself gives you some options. There is definitely very core points in missions that are like, here are some choices, right? And I think I was going to go and say in New Vegas, right? The town that has the nuke, right? So, like, what
Yeah.
is your thoughts on that in terms of narrative basis, right? Um, if you remember that that quest line. You get to
Um,
pick and choose whether you want to nuke a city or
right,
not nuke a
right,
city.
right, right. Yeah, and I mean I'll just say that at least felt great, being there and watching the nuke and everything, and it felt very impactful. I mean, that yeah, my first impression is definitely it was very memorable. It is actually one of the main things I remember about the game.
Yeah, it's one of the first places that players get to. It's one of the first like hub towns that you get to as like learning the game, and it has such an impactful decision on the world of the game, right? Once you actually do that left or right, you just fucking walk away and you just go away. Like that town to everybody else does not exist. It doesn't exist within the greater world of the game. But to you in that moment, you're like, wow, I just fucking blew up an entire city. And you know, it's a great place to save scum. Do both. Go back, blow it up, or not blow it up,
Yeah,
and see where the options are and see what happens. But to me, it's like that is like that's like a semi meaningful choice, right? But because it built into it's semi built into the greater world, where like, oh well, that area is now just irradiated and blown up, and that hub town is gone. Okay, well, I had impact on the world. But if nobody else around the world knows that that thing happened, knows that that exists, then did that decision matter? Like, right? Like, that was a huge moment. I fucking nuked an entire city in the apocalypse. Like,
yeah,
you know, people should be talking to me, right? Like, you mean you know how to use nuclear armaments from fucking World War II or World War III or whatever the fallout was? Like, then so how does that build then into the greater world? Felt like a lull. Like it feels like meaningful, but it does like then all of a sudden you're like, okay, wait, I fucking nuked the town,
that's true.
motherfucker, right?
That's
Like,
true.
but that's kind of like part of the hero's journey too. Oblivion had the exact same thing. The guards would come up to you and be like, pay the quarter fine or blah blah blah. Like, do you know how the fuck I am, dude? Do you know how the fuck I am? I stopped the Oblivion Gate. Do you know who the fuck I am? And it's kind of nice when you walk in to the capitals after doing some of the major reputation grinds in the quest lines, and then getting that buyout option of like, hey, actually, no, people are respecting me now. People are actually talking about my accomplishments and my achievements, and that builds into then the narrative for me of like who my character is in the world over time, right? Because my actions are supposed to change. Like if I am the hero and I am doing this, my actions are supposed to change the landscape of the world fundamentally. But if I don't feel any impact from that and everybody still treats me like a level 1 peon, then what's the point? You know what I mean? I'm just gonna constantly be in that rigmarole of do you know who the fuck I am? Look at the end of my quick save, look at the end of my pointy fucking sword, and then you'll know, and then I'll reload the save again, and then play out the missions like properly, right? But like,
Yeah.
so these are the things that I would think of in my own mind of even in an open world RPG, the quests are theoretically the exact same for the most part, right? Start to end. Some of the choices make differences towards the end, right? Like um, Thieves Guild, whether or not I kill the big head honcho or do I align with some other group, right? But like that then ends up in a position where it's like you're in the same spot. Like that quest line's finished. I'm getting no more quests from here. Somebody else is either the leader or I am the leader, and I never visit that area again. So for me, it's what can you do? Pick and choose where you want to have that like meaningful choice. Like when we're talking about the narrative, right? Like what is the narrative really getting you out? Is it getting you just from point A to point B, or do you want it to be as fragmented as possible? And if you want it to be as fragmented as possible, that's when you're building yourself into like an absolute like matter of fact like nutty situation, like a paper bag that you're not really going to be able to design your way out of because the options that you
Yeah.
can go are going to be so large that your game is going to be so procedural that like you're just gonna have to. It's gonna be kind of like Morrowind, where you just have to throw away quests because an NPC died, and all of a sudden you see that like so and so has died. You cannot complete that quest anymore, and you're like, I didn't even see that NPC. Like,
Yeah.
what the fuck happened to that dude,
That
right?
nor yeah, that
But the
normal gas guy.
but the game has to tell you that because otherwise you'd be searching and you wouldn't know, right? But that could have happened off screen or somewhere else and you have no idea. So I think for me, it's again, I'll go back into this. Define your line of what it means to be multiplicative, choice based, where you want that, and how that's going to build into the game itself. But in these open world RPGs, they don't necessarily impact the game in the way that people think that they do, because they'll change in that storyline, but they don't necessarily change the greater world, right? What it will do is pick and choose your stats, right? Oh, I used my social skills over here, and because I did that, I maybe passed a check and I got some XP, and now I've leveled up that, and that has given me that option to do that more times later on, rather than and use that as my battle path, right? And thinking along those lines when I'm actually in this thing. When I'm a hacker or a lock picker, well, great, I've got lock picking to level 8 of 10. I'm really high up on that. So maybe I don't need to go steal that key from a guard and have to pickpocket and have to deal with that, or I can just go straight to the lock and I can just do that. So now I got to distract the guards at the door and make sure that that's now my target. So I've kind of taken this part out of the quest and moved that away. But when I am on that social sphere, well, now maybe I don't need to pickpocket. Maybe I don't. Maybe I can just like create a party situation and I can walk in and I can influence that person in a certain way to give me the key. Maybe I do that outside of even the the linear quest line hub itself. Maybe that person is at a bar when they're off work and they're down the road and you know that they have the key, so you get them drunk at the bar, and that gives you this option, right? Because nowadays all these NPCs are on scheduling, scheduling mechanics, right? Like at 2 p.m. this character is going to be over here on a Tuesday when it's raining. They're going to be inside, but over here in the gallows, right? So you get that option of being able to kind of like plot that path. So I think again, like I'll go back into this, like that to me is like where open world RPG narrative like is right now, right? Like when you're thinking about the design of it, it's not just like how can I build 10 different options. It's just how can I build 10 different options in this storyline and make sure that all of the little mechanics that I have in my RPG like can be a vector for a different way to play, right? And
Yeah.
and that's your interesting choice. But like maybe but I'm a fucking commercial fucking bimbo, so like I'm not pushing the box, right? I'm pulling from 10 other games that I've played over the years from there to there and saying this is where I see the best versions of those things, right? Is that entertaining and fun? I think it is, especially if you can make those pathways different and make those things interesting in the same way, so it's not always like every time I go into here it's guns a blazing and I can do something a little bit different. Uh, but I don't think that in open world RPGs you get a lot of depth in the actual narrative side of things at the same time too. Maybe you learn
Wait,
something.
did you say you do or don't get depth from the narrative?
I think if you have to obviously build it in, but ask yourself like if it doesn't build into the greater world, like in the Fallout example, right? Then then did all of those decision points up to that point even matter in the end, right? Because like you got to ask yourself that too. It's like how did all of these different decision points that I've made across this entire lifestyle of this RPG character actually even matter, and has
Yeah.
that built into the greater world of things mattering? And that's where, yeah, like Skyrim in their side quests of I am the leader of the Thieves Guild. I am the champion of the Oblivion has this, right? If you win if you win the gauntlet, right? Like the basically the Champions Guild, I think it's called, right? Like the Fighters Guild or whatever. Um, you go into the arena, you battle against people, and blah blah blah. If you win that, everybody then says like, hey, like, oh, it's the champion, blah blah blah, right? And you feel a little bit more accomplished in your own setting. You actually have an accolade in that world. You have something that feels like you have standing above other people. People recognize you, and that to me is like the, the puzzle piece that gets missing a lot of the times. It's like I'll do choices and I will make choices, but the choices are usually some way to influence the mission to like change up the way that the puzzle is set up, change up the way that I want to go and like play this thing. But if I come out of that and there's nothing, it's like, oh, okay. Either there needs to be a narrative reason why there was nothing, like nobody's supposed to know about this, or blah blah blah, or it just didn't. Did it happen? Was it a figment of my imagination in the first place? You know what I mean?
Yeah. And so a lot of this sounds like it comes down to content generation and how you can do it. Because, yeah, of course, if we had a million monkeys typing at the keyboards, we could have, yeah, you can create, amazing things when you have like a ton of people working and creating. You do something in the narrative, and then it generates like huge impacts to the world. But wow, does that get super hard? As you keep going down that with high quality things. But you mentioned something about, yeah, like gameplay impacts. That is easy to do with content generation. You have you go down this one quest line, and then you get like this new power up that you only could get from that quest line. That's a lot cheaper than making a world that conforms to you or something. So
Yeah, but usually all roads lead to that thing,
that too, yeah.
because if you made a wrong choice and you locked yourself out of that, well, maybe does the player ever even perceive that that thing existed? Did you just make content that you just
Right,
never
right,
even told the player
exactly,
about?
exactly,
What if that thing is really important for the boss battle? So it's like,
exactly.
mm,
Because then you have balancing issues. Now you'd be like, all right, we need to make a boss where if he has this item, if he has this item, and this item. So I mean, it gets really hairy really quickly in a lot of ways.
yeah. And there's absolutely independent games that have done way better at story driven, build a world, push you down the lane, and keep making pathways. And I think that one of the bigger ones that we can always look at here, if we wanted to talk about kind of open world, right, in a different context, is those like Japanese style chatting games, right, where Doki Doki
Okay, like a
literal
visual
cove,
novel.
right,
Yeah,
like a visual novel type of game, right, where I have like 10 other people that I can pick and choose from, and I can
yeah,
walk down a lane there. I can choose where I want to take those people, and that changes up kind of how the story. Now,
totally.
contextually, I might only get one time to talk to those individuals, right? I might only get one place to take them. And that choice of where to go actually really impacts your reputation with that individual and might mean make or break of whether or not I get to actually do that again. So you don't get to explore all of the options on the first playthrough. So that creates like a definer in the genre of saying, hey, you can't do everything, right? So there are
Yeah,
actual choices that do lock you out of different side quests, side places, different conversations that you do now need to go and reload at the end of the game, go back and see like, well, no, I picked this person as a companion, so how did that change my gameplay experience? And I think that that's an interesting place to look um, for when we're just talking about how narrative changes up the game, regardless of stats or anything else like that.
yeah.
But I want to, I want to like bring it back to something else, but now I can't think of it at all. But
Okay. Well,
um,
I can comment and pivot as well.
no, it's
If
fine. But yeah,
okay. Yeah. Well, yes. And one reason the visual novels work is that the text and art, or just like a few JPEGs, are cheap to make. So they can really figure out and innovate in the narrative realm. pretty easily compared
Yeah.
to other AAA games.
So where are you putting
Uh,
your content, right? Where are you
yeah,
putting your time into your content? And there it's into the writing and it's into all of the pathways. And because I have static character that had 7 different positions and a couple of particle effects that might play off of those things, right? Like, oh, I'm happy, so it's like the character just does this, right? You know, switches to and then maybe there's
exactly.
like some like love particles that pop off. You're like, cool. Like I got the resolution. I know what happened there. I got some satisfaction out of that. And the thing that I'm getting, like buying back to the user, is the narrative. So like in games like Choices in on mobile, games like Kim Kardashian back in the day in on mobile, the things that people would pay for was all about buying story as a driver, right? It's narrative as a driver. I want to hear what's next. I want to see where this progresses. I want to see how this story plays out. And it might not necessarily be your story. It might be somebody else's story. But the fact is that I am now, if I can get the user invested into that as a concept, as an interesting thing that to pay attention to, then I can buy their time in that sense. And that's what Choices was, right? Or still is, or whatever. Um, would you pay, like there's a great article on uxresearcher.com, like would you pay 199 to kiss somebody in a video game? And that's what that game became, which was all of the fun, dirty, fucking weird BS, like, oh, go cheat on your man, blah,
Yeah,
blah, blah. Like, all of that was just behind a paywall. And all
it
the free
is
options
such.
were all like, go home and eat pizza. It's like, don't give me just the the fucking insular like don't hit me with that. Like I want to go home and eat pizza. I don't want to be at
Yeah,
this fucking nightclub like doing bullshit. Or but
it's
no,
such
you
a
do you want to go
brand new.
you want to go do blow with Johnny in the bathrooms? Like, yeah, but you gotta pay for that, right? You gotta have the credits, and it's kind of like, well, it's kind of fucking bullshit, dude. I
It's
wanted to
such
do
a
blow with Johnny in the
yeah.
bathroom.
It's such a genius monetization scheme. I've never seen anything quite like that. So yes, to for a quick breakdown for others, usually you're giving like you're in a scenario and you're given like two choices, and then there's one that costs diamonds or premium currency, and that's like the much cooler one. So
It's,
that's how they
it's
monetize.
the wild ride, but like think of it in the moment, right? As a different point to Fallout, as a different point to Outer Worlds, any of these open world games, or even just any decision point in a video game. They don't really tell you a lot about what's going to happen next. That anticipation of, oh, well, where the fuck is this going? When have you had that in a narrative decision making moment in an open world RPG? You usually don't. To me,
Just like the Nuketown thing. That's like yeah,
you're like,
yeah,
wow, before, yeah, like, and the Newtown thing, yeah, sure, you're like, okay, well, what's going to happen after? Right? And that's why you kind of maybe pick or choose that option. You save scum and you go back and you blah, blah, blah. But, like, at the same time, you still know that you're going to nuke the town. Well, what if I told you you don't know that you were going to nuke the town? Like, what if they didn't tell you arm the explosive or whatever, right? Or what if it was actually just arm it, you know? Attach this thing.
yeah, yeah.
Now all of a sudden what happens? Does a power struggle all of a sudden happen? Like does somebody now start like going crazy and being like, push it right now, and then the other person's like, holy shit, and then all of a sudden this communication breakdown just happens, and then everybody's just shooting each other in an absolute panic, and you had no idea that your actions were going to build into that moment. But you know what I mean? But you're told you're the one who hits the button, blow up the city, and
Yeah.
I I think that takes away the anticipation moment of what are my actions going to do next, right? You got
Oh,
to
interesting.
it's the same it's the thing that I was trying to get across with the Shelter Story game, right? Is like a story has moments, that you can block the user off and say what's going to happen next, and you got to get them excited about what's happening next, but don't necessarily tell them that, right? Leave that open. That dark void is what then kind of sucks players down that funnel, because they're like, huh, well, what's happening? Oh, well, what about now? What about next? Oh,
Eh,
what?
So just to make sure I'm on the same page? Are you saying if you are if you have the detonator on your hands and you're like, and it only has one option, which is to push the button, so you're gonna blow up the town no matter what. Are you saying because there is no choice there, there is kind of less anticipation and wonder about what happens?
Because
That's very,
because you know
very
what's going to happen. You know at least that the town is going to blow
yeah.
up. Now the fallout from all of that
Right, right.
is the thing that you're supposed to anticipate. But because you're blowing everything up, and then you're basically saying this place doesn't exist anymore, on to the next place, and no one ever references that town ever again.
Right.
You told me what was going to happen before it even happened. So the dialogue option didn't matter. And then the moment is kind of ruined for me of like, I'm watching something play out that I knew was going to occur, so now I'm just watching a cinematic. Rather than being like, holy shit, I just fucking launched a nuke. Fuck, I didn't know I was gonna blow. Fuck, I'm gonna blow up the town. Like, players should probably know like something is gonna happen. Like that is an option, right? That it could happen. The town could blow up or blah blah blah. But like, build more anticipation there. Don't give me the
Yeah.
crescendo before you've even given me the power to do those things. And that's where I would say it's just like in it's an interesting thing when we're reading a book and we hit that point at the end of the chapter and you're like, what's gonna happen next? That's what you want to have.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's gonna happen next?
I've had a nagging question. So there's a concept that I've been debating so much about lately, which is how much player choice to give players in general, not just narrative. And I kind of want to talk about an example of a linear narrative where I think it went well. So first off, there's a new game on mobile that just came out. It made either as much or more than Diablo Immortal, which made like 100 million, by the way.
Mm.
Uh, if it, This game is Nikkei. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but you may have seen it. It's the one that looks like Time Crisis, and you have all the girls like stick their butt at the camera and just jiggles as they fire.
So
um,
I saw some fucking gif of somebody
yeah,
role playing,
yeah,
cosplaying
cosplay.
as the character, and they sat on like a fucking dumb machine that fucking like moved their legs back and
Yeah,
forth.
yeah,
So it's just like, oh, like,
yeah. I don't approve of their ad campaigns, but
can we
this
stop
game.
selling softcore porn to fucking kids? Like that would be fucking cool, right? Can we stop doing that? That'd be fantastic. Awesome, guys.
Here's kind of the trick though. Like despite what they did with the graphics, the game is actually very interesting. And I'll say this about the story. I'm, I will spoil it. I will spoil it. So if you're not
Yeah, it's a
interested,
mobile game. Who gives a shit?
yeah. If you really want it not spoiled, skip ahead like 5 minutes or less. But basically, in the opening chapter, you meet this girl that guides you. She's the mentor that gives you the tutorials. But she at the end of this chapter, she gets corrupted,
Mm-hmm.
and you need to kill her. And it's actually very intense. It's very well done. It's one of the best. It's probably the best story I've ever seen in a mobile game, which is not a high bar. Let's be kind of real there. It was really good. And here's the thing: you always have to kill her. There's no choice. It's a cinematic.
Of course, yeah.
And my question, or something I've been thinking about, is if you were to give the player a choice there, what would have happened? And I think almost no player would have killed the girl, basically. Um, And I think it's kind of interesting when you think about linear narrative that you, like a true linear narrative, that you can guide the player the way you want. Kind of like in, say, Game of Thrones. Like, you nobody wanted all the Starks to die. So they're like, and that, that angered the audience, but also got to take them on a journey that they wouldn't have in the first place. So one of my question is, when should you or when can you go against the player's desires? Because when you look at it from that perspective, I think there is a lot of value to doing that. But when you give them a choice, it's like, hey, do you want to nuke this town or do you not want to nuke this town? They'll always do what they want to do. And by letting the players do exactly what they want to do, I think it prevents you from doing certain things. In the case of Nikkei, it prevents the player from going down this journey of revenge and redemption and all these other things. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, you mean to me, I call those points in games called relief moments, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So specifically, they're always tutorialization, end of tutorialization pathways, right? So have you ever played the New World? Uh, you
No.
know, all right. So MMO from Amazon. Uh, you land on a ship. You have nothing. You play through. You start grabbing things, learning the mechanics, blah blah blah. Level up a little bit. The first like boss that you hit is your sea captain, who you've been seeing and talking to in the cinematics,
Yep.
has, and at the start when you come off of the ship, has become corrupted by some
Hey.
evil. You're introduced to the evil of the world. Somebody who is meaningful to you has fallen to that enemy, and then that killing, that ability where you have to go and say, now I need to end this NPC's life that was supposed to mean something to me. Build that up, right? Like if you can build that meaningfulness to, properly. New World doesn't care. It's just like whatever. You're gonna do this 100 times if you want to level new characters, whatever. Um, but that's the point, is to get you to care. But it's also to introduce the big bad. Like, oh, okay. Well, like here's the corruption, and then the corruption's made by who? Like, we need to go figure this out. Blah blah blah. Like, let's explore this world, and it tries to give you this beat moment of saying, okay, from here on out, you are now free of our prologue. You can now go out into the world and make decisions based off of what you have just seen, right? So it's like manufacturing revenge, or manufacturing a
Yeah.
reason
Yeah.
to fight and exist in this world. Like, I hate the corruption. Corruption's evil. The evil took this thing away from me. Took the big booty anime bitches away from me, right? Like, I'll never fucking forgive you. I'll never forgive you.
I was ready to spend $100 to get
I
that thing.
wanted it. Stop. Yeah, then Final Fantasy Online does the exact same thing, right? Play through the tutorial does the same thing. So it's like these. I think that these things are interesting, I guess, if you can make them cool. But to me, it's like, I don't know, patternistic. I see through them pretty fucking hardcore. So it's like, meh. But if you can build it up, like, make it meaningful, right? Like, if that was a meaningful storyline for you, and you got up to that point, well then great. Now you might have your own reason to exist within that world. You have your own reason to go out and fight. Your own morality there around how you want to then tackle other people that are corrupted by this stuff, right? So now all of a sudden, do you take a humanitarian approach? Is that some pathway that you're allowed to take within the world? But that means you have to go make potions and research and antidote and blah blah blah. Or do you just go and say, no, I need to kill all corruption and kill all evil, and now you go on a murderous path where you don't do any of the research, you don't try to take a pacifist approach to the gameplay and go from there. And like, I mean, again, like, I think that there's loads of games that have done this in interesting ways. That type of stuff leads me into like frick. I never actually played the game, but it has the White Skull 2D pixel game
Uh,
character. Can be
Hollow
replayed.
Knight?
No, not Hollow Knight.
No.
Can be
What?
replayed a bunch of different times. All the games you can play an entire pacifist run of the
Oh,
entire game.
it's on. It starts with UN. But I also
Undertale.
Undertale.
Undertale,
Of course.
right?
Yes.
So like, is Undertale an open world RPG, right? Because you get to pick and choose which ways you want to tackle different problems, and that different problems gives you different narrative outcomes. But you tend to end up in the same place again, right? So I just think it's like, just if you're going to go down these routes, it's about making motivations for players to pick and choose a pathway, build some anticipation of what that pathway is going to get me on, going forward, and then try to have payoff for all of those things, so meaningful payoff that like matters to the player in terms of like rewarding moments, right? Um, but I don't know, it's hard because like you can do a bunch of shit under the hood, right? Like if they pick and choose this dialogue option and they kill that town, or they do this or that, or left or right, like you could change a shit ton of heuristics under the hood and completely change how enemies are going to interact with you. Maybe all of a sudden, if you blew up that town, oh, the Thieves Guild is actually like, hey, you fucking blew up that town. Pretty sweet. Like, and they just let you in, and you don't have to battle them, or you don't lock off that whole quest chain to yourself, right? But that then now needs to be something for the next playthrough. So you have to be cognizant as a designer of saying, I've just taken that content, thrown that away, and that player will not be able to do that thing. So what's next for that player? And then you go and say, well, now I'm not trying to build two entirely separate different games. So you always have to have these ebb and flows and coming back to center at some point. You need players to be at
Yeah.
the major beats that you want them to be at. And you need to get them there in a logical fashion.
I
Start.
think that's. Oh,
Oh
go ahead.
yeah. I mean, I don't know. It's very different though when you look at like shit.
Do it again. I love this game. You just throw out some description. This is so fun.
Open world procedural game, No Man's Sky. Right.
Damn it, you're too fast for
I
me.
was too fast on that one. I should have just given it to you. So No Man's Sky, super procedural. Um, all these characters pop out of nowhere and try to build story over time. Now, think of the spoken hub of it all. There is none, right? It's not like there's a major city that is my hub, and then there are spoke towns out in the wild that are like little places where I can get injection of more quests, more narrative, more story, right? And then kind of come back to all of that, and then later on. Shut the fuck up, Apple Watch. The game of No Man's Sky will put very specific buildings, and those buildings have their own storylines to themselves. And whether or not you came across it on this planet, or that planet, or in this solar system, the next time that you hit that building type, you will get this story. Now, they'll change some things up depending on what the building is, where it is, or how much of some other knowledge you may know, but the underlying knowledge is like the language itself. So you have to go out and like learn the language that you're being told by these different races, that then gives this extra layer of decision. Because you may not know what the language is, you don't know which way to pick and choose, and you have to actually then kind of infer or learn a little bit more about like that culture and community, and it makes the player dig a little bit more, makes the player try to have to gain and retain a little bit more knowledge about these individual cultures. And I think that that's interesting by itself, but it can be it can be kind of completely disregarded. And if you don't retain that knowledge, you lose it. You might just start making bad choices, and then you might just go and start doing what I did, which is walk to every single NPC and just click as fast as fucking possible. And you get a result or you don't get a result, and a lot of
Yeah.
the times you get reputation down. But I
That's
just,
funny.
but a lot of the times they just give you items, and I'm like, cool, keep giving me shit. I don't really care. Like, so you know what I mean? You're the amount of choices that you give and the depth of choices that you can have within a game can actually have negative effects in the player's play style, and if they actually are not meaningful enough or they're too repetitive in their own senses, like i.e. every time I go to an NPC I have 100 different options that I can pick and choose from, I'm gonna disregard a lot of those because I just want to get through them. I have, hey dude, I got fucking 25 other dudes that I gotta go and ask. Have you heard any rumors? Right, like, so great. Then I'm gonna walk into that tavern. I'm gonna talk to every single one. Click, click, click. Okay, cool. Got some. Click, click. Okay, wait. That's new. That's new. That's new. Okay, maybe I found something now. Okay, all right, cool. Like, but that disregards your narrative in the form of gameplay. And if people are digging
Yeah.
and seeking for things like that, maybe you've missed the mark on where you're trying to go.
Yeah, and I think maybe as a last topic, I'll talk about that group of players. I'll speak for all you gameplay only people out there.
Mm-hmm.
We have been so burned by narrative over the years and decades that we just don't trust it because paying attention to narrative it's very costly. Oh, go ahead. It sounds like
No, keep going, keep going. I'm
okay.
saving this
Yeah.
for
Uh,
for the crescendo.
yeah. Yeah. There are great. Okay, so a narrative game I really like. It's called To the Moon. It's pretty much RPG Maker game, very standard. But because I had nothing else to do in the game, because it is a walking simulator, I was like, all right, I guess I'll pay attention to the narrative. Also, because I heard it was a really good game story, so I was invested from it in the start. But that's usually not the case with a lot of games for me. Um, yeah, like I don't know. You jump in a game and you see a cinematic. It's like I want to shoot people right now. I have all these other things I want to do, rather than look at narrative, which has burned me in the past. But I think I don't know. I think as devs get better at narrative and can prove to me and the rest of my kin that narrative is worth paying attention to, that whatever the decisions matter, these are interesting things, then I can be brought back. I don't think there are people that are always gameplay only. um, there is something very core to stories and narrative that do drive us, but yeah, you have to convince us to come back. That's what we're thinking.
Y'all motherfuckers don't read.
We watch movies though.
Just don't read.
We watch movies.
But like, you know, that's the thing. Is like, what's actually then? What's the point of you playing some of these games, right? Like, you know what I mean? Is at that point it's just a sandbox RPG, and you're just like getting things, and you're just like, well, I'll guess I'll just use that and use it over here, right? So like, I generally think that in these types of games, those types of games, right? Like the open world ones, right? It's it's like a third of the game is the story, but it is like part of the when, where, and why. But what you're not dealing with is like you're always going to be on those pathways, and the gameplay itself kind of tells you a little bit about like where you are and what's going on. So, um, I just like I would dig a little deeper into your own thing of like what's really stopping you from engaging with that narrative in a specific game. And if you
Absolutely.
know what I mean, and this for like anybody who goes and says that like I just don't pay attention to the story. It's like try. Just try. Because it's you'll notice that like yeah, sure, it doesn't always matter, but in some games, yes it does. Like and it does matter. And think of it as narrative as a driver. How do you get somebody excited about that narrative? And that's not about narrative choice. That's just the overarching story by itself. So is this just a case of game designers can't write good stories? Or
I
is it
think it's a big part.
writers write too much story and it gets lost, right? So like there's some fine line between pulling me along as a game designer to the player, like dropping that string with that 20 in front of me and then just putting it on a
Absolutely.
fishing hook, like more carrot, less stick.
No, I
Read.
totally agree, and I yeah, this is definitely a topic I think about often, and I think one thing for me is that in the game, I'm generally not invested in your story right away. Like, think about it economically. Like, the game has no rapport with me, and is asking me to watch a very long cutscene. I will if I'm playing a game and it's gentle to me and I'm kind of I get to play a lot and I get invested in the world and I'm curious about the world, anticipation like you said. I probably will be willing to engage with the narrative, but boy, do a lot of games overvalue their early narrative to set up the stage.
I
So
would
that's
encourage anybody. So that's where those handoff moments are. That's where your anime girl got corrupted and you had to kill her. That's that crescendo moment earlier on to try and get you a
yeah,
reason to
yeah.
believe, to care, right?
And I do read the story now, which is super rare, super rare.
Go play old school RuneScape. Go read the text. See how interesting the kind of descriptive text actually is. And what you'll notice is like, well, for me personally, when I start getting up into the finishing the free to play quest series called just Dragon Slayer, if you do the Dragon Slayer 1, the the narrative of the world seems to really resonate. You can completely throw it away, but the narrative actually does get you to the end. You can't do it without reading, because otherwise then you just have to make guides. Like everybody just has a guide and it's just do this step, then do this step, then do this step, right? World of Warcraft has run into this for forever. Nobody reads the quest text. It is now pointers and locations and quest objectives and bars and like,
That
right?
poor writing team. They
Yeah.
know none of their stuff gets read.
So it's like, what do you do there, right? Because it fucks with the pace of the game as well too, and you have to be valuable to the player in terms of their time. Is the player in an RPG and they're leveling? They need to get to level 80 from level 4. Well, guess what?
They got to
Le-
raid, man. They got to raid with
yeah,
their friends.
your level 4 quests don't fucking matter, dude. So make it simple, make it quirky, just make it interesting by itself, and know your place. Know your place in the content. Don't spend too
Yeah,
long on it.
yeah, yeah,
Spend time where it matters. So, I
yeah.
don't know. There's loads of fucking things on narrative, but we could. I don't know. We can. I hopefully that gives some sort of context to some of the discussions you guys are having over there.
Yeah, yeah. It is a deep topic for sure.
Sweet. Well, Calvin, thank you so much.
Good
Welcome
seeing
back.
you.